Martha Caldwell stood at her cabin window, rifle in hand, as the distant thunder of hoofbeats approached through the thick Arizona pines. The man slumped over his saddle had 3 days left before the sheriff would arrive with the truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew about justice and betrayal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gunshot wound in the stranger's shoulder had stopped bleeding, but the fever was setting in fast. Martha had found him collapsed by her water trough, his horse still standing faithfully beside him, its flanks streaked with salt and foam. The animal had clearly been ridden hard for days. "Easy now," she whispered, supporting the stranger as they stumbled toward her cabin. "Let's get you inside before anyone else comes looking." His eyes flickered open for just a moment, piercing blue against the dirt and blood on his face. "Hide me," he rasped, his grip tightening on her arm with surprising strength. "They'll hang me for something I didn't do." Inside, Martha cleared her kitchen table with one sweep of her arm, sending yesterday's sketches for her latest saddle design scattering to the floor. The stranger was taller than she'd initially thought, his frame lean but muscular. His clothes were expensive, not the typical rough denim and flannel of cowboys who passed through these parts. Custom boots, quality leather holster, and rings that caught the lamplight as she helped him onto the table. "Name's Jack Morrison," he managed between gritted teeth as she cut away his shirt. The bullet had gone clean through, which was both. "You're good and bad. Good because she wouldn't have to dig for lead. Bad because the entry and exit wounds told her it had been fired at close range. Someone had wanted him dead." "Martha Caldwell," she replied, already gathering clean rags and her medicine box. Years of tending to injured horses and the occasional hurt cowhand had made her skilled at field treatment. "What's chasing you? Law? Outlaws? Both?" "Sheriff Harvey's." "Impossible," Jack said, his voice fading as the pain and exhaustion caught up. "They're calling me a murderer, say I killed a rancher named Benjamin Walsh outside Prescott 3 days ago, but I was gambling in a saloon in Flagstaff when it happened. Nobody's vouched for me. I'd beaten them all at cards." Martha had heard of Walsh, a prosperous man with political connections, found shot dead in his study. The kind of crime that would have half the territory up in arms, demanding swift justice. She poured whiskey over both wounds, ignoring Jack's sharp intake of breath. "Why come here?" she asked, studying his face for any sign of deception. "My place isn't exactly on any traveler's map. Needed somewhere off the main trails. Your cabin, I've been watching it for a while." At her raised eyebrow, he continued, "Not in a strange way, just safe haven. You live alone, keep to yourself, and you raise the finest horses in the territory. Word gets around about someone who minds their own business." It was true. Martha had built her horse breeding operation through careful planning and harder work. 5 years ago, after her husband died in a mining accident, she turned the cabin into a sanctuary. No prying neighbors, no social obligations, just her and her animals. Now, this man was asking her to risk everything. She worked in silence for the next hour, cleaning and bandaging the wounds, while Jack drifted in and out of consciousness. Outside, the Arizona sun climbed higher, turning the air thick with August heat. Through the window she could see her stallion, Thunder, pacing the corral fence. The horse had excellent instincts. He knew something was wrong. When Jack woke, again his fever had risen. Martha brought cool water and willow bark tea. "Drink slowly," she instructed, helping him sit up. "Tell me everything. If you're innocent like you claim, there must be someone who can help." Jack's laugh was bitter. "The only witness who could clear me is my traveling companion, Carlos Rivera. We split up after Flagstaff. He headed to Phoenix. I came north. But he wouldn't know where to find me. And with Walsh dead, they won't wait long for evidence." "Walsh was shot at close range," Martha mused aloud. "Personal killing, not a robbery or random violence." You're clever, Jack said, studying her with those piercing eyes. Ever thought about being a detective instead of a horse breeder? Horses are more honest than people, she replied curtly. They don't lie, cheat, or hide secrets. Tell me about Walsh. Ever meet him before? Jack shifted on the makeshift bed Martha had arranged by the fireplace. Once, at a horse auction in Tucson 6 months back, he was trying to buy a mare I'd been watching, outbid me with money he probably made from buying up smaller ranches for pennies on the dollar. Man had a reputation for using the law to his advantage. Martha's pulse quickened. She'd heard similar stories about Walsh. What kind of advantage? Foreclosures, mostly. He'd lend money to struggling ranchers, then call in the debts early. When they couldn't pay, he'd get the sheriff to enforce seizure. Walsh would end up with prime land for a fraction of its worth. This was news to Martha. If Walsh had made powerful enemies, Jack might indeed be innocent and a convenient scapegoat. But that still didn't explain why he'd run straight to her isolated cabin. The afternoon wore on as Martha tended to her horses while Jack rested. She couldn't help but steal glances back at the cabin, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. The smart thing would be to turn him in, collect whatever reward was being offered. But something in Jack's eyes had given her pause. Fear, yes, but not the kind she'd expect from a guilty man. It was the fear of knowing the truth wouldn't matter if the wrong people had already made up their minds. By evening, Jack was strong enough to sit up and eat the venison stew Martha had prepared. They ate in silence, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. "Why help me?" Jack finally asked, breaking the quiet. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be exactly what they say." Martha set down her spoon, considering her. "Answer carefully. 6 months ago, my best mare died foaling. The vet said I'd been negligent, that any competent breeder would have seen the signs. Started rumors that nearly destroyed my reputation. Turns out he was being paid by a competitor who wanted to buy my land cheap after I failed." "But you didn't fail," Jack observed. "No. Took weeks to prove my horse had a rare condition, one even experienced vets miss. Truth eventually came out, but some damage can't be undone." She looked at him directly. "I know what it's like when people judge you before hearing your side." Jack nodded slowly. "Walsh had a strange visitor the day before he died. A woman came to his ranch, argued with him in the study. The housekeeper overheard them fighting about money. When I heard about the murder, I wondered if it was connected. But who'd believe the word of a drifter over Walsh's sterling reputation? What about Walsh's family? Did he have enemies among them?" "A nephew, Daniel Walsh, inherited everything. Been acting as foreman at the main ranch for the past year. Some say Ben didn't trust his nephew, was planning to change his will. Others claim Daniel had gambling debts in Phoenix." Martha's mind raced. The more she learned, the murkier the situation became. If Jack was telling the truth, then someone else had committed the murder and needed him to take the fall. But without evidence or allies, his innocence meant nothing. "We have 3 days," she said firmly. 3 days before the sheriff's likely to think of checking isolated homesteads. In that time, we need to figure out who really killed Benjamin Walsh." Jack looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You'd do that? Risk everything for a stranger?" "I'm not doing it for you," Martha replied, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. "I'm doing it because the truth matters, and because I've got a feeling if we don't uncover it, an innocent man will hang." Night fell over the cabin as they began piecing together what they knew. Martha brought out paper and pencils, sketching a rough map of the territory, marking towns, ranches, and probable routes the killer might have taken. Jack contributed what he remembered about Walsh's business dealings, his rivals, and the mysterious woman visitor. "There's something else," Jack admitted as the fire crackled low. "The morning I left Flagstaff, I saw someone watching me from across the street. Thought nothing of it then, but now they could have been tracking my movements, setting me up." Did you recognize them? No, but they wore distinctive clothing, a red bandana and silver conchos on their belt, not typical cowboy gear. Martha's breath caught. Red bandana and silver conchos. That sounds like Vicente Red Morales. He runs errands for the saloon owners in Prescott. Mostly legitimate work, but rumors say he'll do anything for the right price. You think Walsh hired him? No, Martha said slowly, her mind working through possibilities. But someone who wanted you framed for Walsh's murder might have hired him to follow you, lead them to where you'd run when accused. The implications hung heavy in the small cabin. If someone had planned this elaborate frame, they'd calculated Jack's likely movements. But why lead him here? Unless... What if they know about your reputation? Jack suggested, reading her thoughts. Your isolation. Your tendency to help those wrongly accused. What if they counted on you helping me, knowing it would keep me in one place long enough for the sheriff to find me here? Makes for a neater story. Fugitive hiding with accomplice. Martha felt a chill despite the warm night. Then we're not just solving a murder, we're dismantling a carefully planned conspiracy. They spent the next hours strategizing. Martha's knowledge of the local terrain and her connections to the horse trading network could provide information others couldn't access. Jack's familiarity with Walsh's business dealings and his observations during his flight could help identify who'd benefit most from framing him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As dawn approached, they developed a plan. Martha would ride to town, carefully gathering information about Walsh's final days, and any strangers asking questions about Jack's whereabouts. Jack would search through Walsh's known associates, looking for connections to the mysterious woman who'd argued with him before his death, but their investigation hit its first snag when thunder began pawing nervously at his corral fence, just as the sun crested the horizon. Martha went to calm him, but the stallion's agitation suggested trouble approaching. "Someone's coming," she warned Jack, rushing back inside. "Hide in the root cellar. I'll handle this." Minutes later, 3 riders appeared on the ridge overlooking her cabin. Martha recognized Pete Sullivan, who ran the general store in Cedar Rapids, riding alongside 2 men she didn't know. Sullivan occasionally brought supplies when she couldn't make it to town, but unexpected visits usually meant trouble. "Morning, Martha," Sullivan called out cheerfully as they approached. "Brought some friends interested in your horses." Martha stepped out to meet them, rifle casually cradled in her arms. "Bit early for horse trading, Pete. What brings you out this way?" The taller of the 2 strangers dismounted, tipping his hat. "Name's Thomas Beck, ma'am. Coming through from Tucson. Heard you might have a roan stallion for sale." "I don't," Martha replied flatly. Her only roan was Whisper, her late husband's favorite, and she'd never consider selling him. These men weren't here for horses. Beck's companion remained mounted, his hand resting suspiciously close to his holster. "Funny thing," Beck continued, "we passed through Flagstaff yesterday. Heard about some trouble involving a gambler matching the description of a man riding past here 2 days ago." Martha's heart pounded, but she kept her face neutral. "Lots of men ride past here. It's the only trail to the northern timber camps." "This man would have been injured," Beck pressed. "Gunshot wound, probably. You being known for your medical skills and all, figured he might have stopped for help." "Nobody's stopped here recently," Martha lied smoothly. "Just Pete bringing supplies last week. You boys are welcome to water your horses, but then I've got work to do." Sullivan looked uncomfortable. "Come on, Tom. Martha says nobody came through. Let's head back to town." But Beck wasn't satisfied. His eyes scanned the cabin, the outbuildings, the corral. "You mind if we take a look around? Sheriff Harvey's offering a substantial reward for information about this fugitive. Worth checking. Don't you think?" Martha's grip tightened on her rifle. "I do mind. This is my property, and I've told you what I know. Unless you've got a warrant, I suggest you move along." Tension crackled in the morning air. The third man finally spoke, his voice rough with menace. "Lady's being awfully protective of an empty cabin." "The lady is protecting her privacy," Martha shot back. "Something you city boys might not understand." For a long moment, it seemed violence might erupt, but Beck was smarter than his companion. He'd noticed Martha's rifle wasn't just for show. Her stance suggested someone who knew how to use it. "We'll be on our way," he said finally, remounting, "but we'll be back through this area. If you hear anything about this fugitive, there's good money in it for information." The three men rode off, but Martha knew they wouldn't go far. They'd probably circle back, wait for her to let her guard down. She needed to move faster than planned. Inside, Jack had heard everything through the cellar hatch. "They're not ordinary bounty hunters," he said as he emerged. "Beck's too well-spoken, too careful. He's working for someone with resources." "Agreed. And they're watching the cabin now. I'd bet on it." Martha began gathering supplies. "We need to split up. I'll ride to town as planned, but you'll have to find another route to investigate Walsh's connections." "Where should I start?" Martha considered. Walsh had a banker in Prescott, Harold Finch. If Walsh was involved in fraudulent foreclosures, Finch would know about it. He's also the kind who might crack under the right pressure. They spent the next hour planning Jack's route, one that would avoid the main trails and likely surveillance points. Martha packed him supplies, including a change of clothes that might help him blend in better. As Jack prepared to leave, they established a rendezvous point, an abandoned mining camp halfway between Prescott and Martha's cabin, where they'd meet the following night to share information. "Thank you," Jack said simply as he saddled one of Martha's horses. "I can't promise I can ever repay this." "Stay alive and find the truth," Martha replied. "That'll be enough payment." After Jack disappeared into the tree line, Martha saddled her own horse and headed toward Cedar Rapids. The ride gave her time to think. If someone had orchestrated this frame-up with such detail, they had significant resources and inside knowledge. Who had that kind of power in the territory? The Prescott political machine came to mind, a network of businessmen, lawmen, and officials who'd controlled the region for decades. Walsh had been part of that machine, but perhaps he'd crossed someone more powerful. Or maybe he'd simply outlived his usefulness. Cedar Rapids was bustling with its usual Monday commerce when Martha arrived. She hitched her horse outside the general store, making small talk with familiar faces while keeping her true purpose hidden. Inside, Sullivan was back at his post, organizing the new shipment of goods. "Pete," she said casually, "been hearing some wild rumors about Benjamin Walsh. Such a shock. Any idea what really happened?" Sullivan glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Officially, they're saying it was a traveling gambler. But between you and me, Walsh had been acting strange lately, paranoid. Kept talking about someone trying to undermine his business. Any idea who? Could be anyone. Walsh wasn't exactly loved in these parts, but..." Sullivan hesitated, then continued in a whisper, "I heard he'd been investigating some irregularities in the county records, real estate transactions that didn't add up. Was planning to bring charges against someone powerful." Martha's pulse quickened. "Did he mention names?" "No, but he did ask me to keep an ear out for any strangers asking questions about his routines. Said he'd made a dangerous enemy." This confirmed Jack's theory about a conspiracy, but raised new questions. Who had Walsh been investigating? And had that investigation gotten him killed? She thanked Sullivan and continued her rounds through town, stopping at the newspaper office, the saloon, and the telegraph station. Each conversation added pieces to the puzzle. Walsh had indeed been paranoid in his final weeks. He'd changed his riding patterns, varied his routes home, and even considered hiring private security. At the saloon, she learned something crucial. 3 days before his death, Walsh had met with a woman, not his regular business associates or social contacts. The barkeep described her as fancy-dressed Eastern manners, asking lots of questions about land deeds. "Did you catch her name?" Martha asked. "Called herself Miss Elizabeth Parker, claimed to be researching her family's property claims." But Walsh got real uncomfortable when she mentioned the name Caldwell. Martha nearly dropped her whiskey. Caldwell was her maiden name, the name under which her family had owned significant land in the territory before a series of suspicious foreclosures had taken it all. Her father had always suspected Walsh was involved but could never prove. The revelation hit her like ice water. This wasn't random. Whoever had killed Walsh was connected to her past, to her family's lost lands. And Jack hadn't stumbled to her cabin by accident. He'd been herded there, meant to be caught hiding with the very person whose family Walsh had wronged. As she rode home, Martha's mind raced with implications. The frame-up wasn't just about pinning murder on an innocent man. It was about destroying two potential threats in one move. Jack, who apparently knew something about Walsh's business dealings, and Martha, who might have legitimate claims against Walsh's estate. But why? Now? What had triggered this elaborate plot? Back at her cabin, Martha searched through old family documents, looking for clues. She found what she was looking for in her father's journal. Notes about a specific foreclosure from 10 years ago. Walsh had seized 2,000 acres of prime grazing land from the Caldwell family, claiming unpaid debts that her father swore were fabricated. The land had never been developed or sold. According to her father's notes, Walsh had held onto it, suggesting it had value beyond its agricultural potential. Inside, the deputies began their search with the ruthlessness of men following orders. They overturned furniture, scattered papers, rifled through her personal effects. All the while, Harvey kept his eyes fixed on Martha as if gauging her reactions. No, Harvey said conversationally. It's funny how Morrison chose to run in this direction. Of all the places in the territory, he ended up near you. Arizona's full of coincidences, Martha replied. Indeed. Like how Benjamin Walsh was investigating fraudulent land deals right before his death, deals that affected your family quite severely. The deputies had reached the kitchen now, one of them discovering the false panel in the floor that led to the root cellar. Martha's heart raced, but she knew the cellar was empty, though it bore recent signs of use. "Someone's been down here," the deputy called out. "Fresh, disturbed dirt, smell of recent occupation." Harvey smiled coldly. "Well now, Mrs. Caldwell, still claim you haven't seen anyone matching Morrison's description?" Before Martha could respond, gunfire erupted from the surrounding woods. Men shouted, horses screamed. The deputies running from her cabin drew their weapons, confused about where the threat originated. In the chaos, Jack's voice rang out from the loft window. "Harvey! Your hidden men are compromised. We've got them surrounded." It was a bluff. Jack was alone up there, but it worked. Harvey's face drained of color as he realized their carefully laid plan was unraveling. "What is this?" Elizabeth demanded, drawing a small pistol from her reticule with practiced ease. "Harvey, you said this would be simple. Get Morrison. Implicate. Martha, divide Walsh's estate properly." "Elizabeth," Harvey snapped, but the damage was done. The deputies had heard everything. "I suggest we all remain calm," came a new voice from the edge of the tree line. Judge Harrison Morrison, not the circuit judge Martha had sent her sealed evidence to, but his younger brother, U.S. Marshal Harrison Morrison, emerged with 4 federal deputies. "Sheriff Harvey, Elizabeth Caldwell Parker, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice." The next hour was a whirlwind of revelations. The gunfire had been from Morrison's men, who'd been tracking the larger conspiracy since Walsh's murder. They'd intercepted Martha's evidence and connected the dots faster than the conspirators anticipated. As the conspirators were restrained, the full scope of their scheme finally emerged. Walsh had indeed been murdered by Daniel Walsh, his nephew, acting under pressure from the Highland Investment Trust. The trust was a front for money laundering operations involving stolen land and embezzled bank funds. Elizabeth had been the East Coast connection, moving money through Denver banks and back into legitimate businesses. "But why frame Jack?" Martha demanded, as the handcuffs clinked around Harvey's wrists. "We needed Morrison dead anyway." Elizabeth spat. He'd seen too much at the Flagstaff gambling tables. Daniel Walsh had been laundering money through staged card games. Jack won too much, started asking questions about the source of the money. Jack descended from the loft, weapon trained on the prisoners. "So Walsh turned him in to you?" "Not initially," Harvey admitted, his bravado crumbling. "Daniel went to his uncle for help. Benjamin was still trying to be the man of the law he'd once been. He refused to help frame an innocent man. That's when Daniel decided his uncle had become a liability." "And you chose Martha's cabin as the trap," Jack pressed, Elizabeth suggested. Harvey confessed. She knew about Martha's property, her isolation, and her history with wrongfully accused men. "She bet Martha would hide you long enough for us to find you both." "Then why not just kill me 3 days ago?" Jack asked. "Timing," Elizabeth said coldly. "Daniel needed the estate settled, the money moved, the deals finalized. We needed everyone. Distracted, chasing shadows. And Martha?" She looked at her cousin with pure contempt. "Martha needed to lose everything, same as her father. This cabin, these horses, her freedom, all would have gone to satisfy debts to the territory." The marshal's men finished securing the prisoners. Morrison approached Martha and Jack with a grim expression. "I owe you both an apology," he said. "We've been investigating Walsh's murder and the land fraud for months. We should have acted sooner, protected him better, but we needed concrete evidence linking the corruption network." "You used us as bait," Martha said flatly. "Not intentionally. But when we intercepted your documents, we realized you'd uncovered what we needed. We had to move fast to save you both." "What happens now?" Jack asked. "There's a full investigation ahead. The Highland Investment Trust involved at least 7 prominent citizens, including 2 congressmen. It'll take months to unravel every thread." Morrison looked at Jack directly. "You're cleared of all charges, Morrison. The territory owes you restitution. And Mrs. Caldwell," he turned to Martha, "your family's land claims will be fully reviewed. Any fraudulent seizures will be returned." As the prisoners were led away, Elizabeth called out, "You always were too soft, Martha. Father said it would be your undoing. Guess he was wrong. Again." Martha watched her cousin disappear into the custody wagon without responding. Some betrayals cut too deep for words. In the aftermath, as the dust literally and figuratively settled, Martha and Jack found themselves alone on her porch. The morning's violence seemed surreal now, though overturned furniture and scattered papers inside reminded them it had been real. "You saved my life," Jack said simply. "We saved each other," Martha corrected, "though I'm wondering if saving it was worth nearly losing everything else. You still have your horses, your land, your life. And you?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "I have a clean name. For the first time in my life, actually. Turns out, that forgery charge in Colorado was also part of this network. They've been targeting anyone who got too close to their operations." Martha studied him carefully. The past 3 days had shown her glimpses of the man beneath the charm and mystery. "What now?" "I should probably disappear again," Jack said. "New town, fresh start, it's what I know." "Or," Martha suggested, "you could stay. Help me rebuild after this mess. I'll need extra hands with these horses, and you clearly know your way around a stable. You trust me that much, after everything?" "Trust is earned," Martha said. "You earned it by standing your ground when it counted." Jack nodded slowly. "I'd like that. Though I should warn you, I'm not planning to stop digging into Highland's affairs. They've ruined too many lives. Walsh was just the beginning." "Then I'll help," Martha decided. "I've got documents my father collected over the years, names of other families they targeted. We could do a lot of good." As the afternoon sun slanted across the Arizona landscape, beginning to dry the evidence of morning's battle, Martha and Jack started the process of putting her cabin back in order. There was comfort in the familiar tasks, in the wordless understanding that had developed between them, but Martha couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was still incomplete. Too many threads remained untied, too many questions unanswered. Harrison Morrison had rushed away with his prisoners, promising to return with the full investigation report, but had he really captured everyone involved? 2 days later, while Jack worked with her horses and Martha inventoried damaged supplies, Deputy Marshal Peterson arrived with a telegram from Morrison. The message was brief but troubling. D. Walsh attempted escape during transport. 3 federal deputies dead. Walsh missing. Exercise extreme caution. Martha showed the telegram to Jack, whose face darkened with concern. He'll come here for revenge and to tie up loose ends. Let him come, Martha said grimly. We haven't dismantled our defenses. But Jack shook his head. He's desperate now. We need to take the offensive. Over the next 24 hours, they developed a plan based on their newfound knowledge of Daniel Walsh's remaining resources. If he was running, he'd need money. Money likely hidden in places only he knew about. The mining claims, Jack suddenly said during their evening strategy session. Walsh mentioned abandoned mines during our brief conversation. If he was laundering money through gambling, he might have been using them to store cash reserves. Martha pulled out her father's old mining maps. The territory was dotted with played-out claims, many legally owned by Walsh's empire. Cross-referencing these with the foreclosed properties, they identified 3 likely locations. The closest is Devil's Canyon, Martha noted. Old silver mine, about 20 miles north. Walsh posted guards there last year, claiming vandalism concerns. Guards at an abandoned mine? Jack raised an eyebrow. That's our target. Dawn found them riding hard toward Devil's Canyon, pushing their horses to cover ground quickly. The route took them through some of the territory's most rugged landscape, red rock formations that had witnessed 1,000 stories of greed and betrayal. They reached the canyon entrance by mid-morning. From their vantage point, they could see 2 men posted at the mine shaft. Martha recognized one as Red Morales, Elizabeth's enforcer, whom they'd discussed during their investigation. If they're here, the money's here, Jack whispered, and possibly Walsh. Using the canyon's natural cover, they approached the mine on foot. Martha's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable. She knew hidden paths that allowed them to bypass the guards' sight lines. Inside, the mine proved their suspicions correct. Wooden crates were stacked against the far wall, and papers scattered across a makeshift desk suggested recent activity. But they weren't alone. "Step away from those papers," Daniel Walsh's voice echoed from the shadows. He emerged, pointing a revolver, his expensive suit now worn and stained with desperate travel. "I should have killed you both when I had the chance." "Like, you killed your uncle," Jack said, keeping his hands visible. "Uncle Benjamin was a fool. Developed a conscience after years of playing the game. Started threatening everything we'd built." "Everything you'd stolen," Martha corrected. Walsh's eyes shifted between them, calculating odds. "The federal marshals are dead. My men are still. Out there, you 2 are just another tragedy waiting to happen. Your men are in custody," Jack lied smoothly. "Morrison survived your escape. He's probably surrounding this place right now." Walsh's conviction faltered just enough. In that moment, Jack dove left, while Martha drew her concealed pistol. The cave erupted with gunfire, the sound amplified by stone walls. When the echoes died, Walsh lay wounded but alive, his weapons scattered beyond reach. Martha kept her gun trained on him, while Jack checked the documents. "Financial records," Jack announced. "Account numbers, property deeds, names of co-conspirators. This could bring down the entire network." "You'll never see those survive," Walsh groaned. "I've got men coming. This whole territory is mine." "Not anymore," Martha said quietly. They secured Walsh with his own belt and began gathering evidence. As they worked, Jack found something unexpected, a ledger detailing every fraudulent foreclosure, including the Caldwell property. More importantly, it contained Walsh's handwritten confession that he'd merely been a figurehead, controlled by Judge Leonard Blackwood and banker Marcus Sterling. "We need to get this to Morrison," Martha said, but Jack was already thinking ahead. "We can't risk transport. Those men Walsh mentioned could be anywhere." As if summoned by his words, shots rang out from the canyon entrance. Red Morales and his companions had discovered their approach. They were trapped in the mine with limited ammunition and one wounded prisoner. "There's another way out," Martha said suddenly. "Old ventilation shaft, narrow, but it connects to the canyon 2 miles down." They had no choice. Dragging Walsh and carrying the precious evidence, they retreated deeper into the mine. The shaft was treacherous, barely wide enough for one person. Behind them, their pursuers' voices echoed, growing closer. The crawl through darkness tested them all. Walsh, despite his wound, attempted to slow their progress, forcing himself to stumble and block the narrow passage. But determination and fear are powerful motivators. They emerged gasping into sunlight at the far end of the canyon. Ahead lay open territory and hopefully safety. Behind, they could still hear Morales and his men navigating the mine. "We need to reach Cedar Rapids," Jack panted. "Get back up!" But Cedar Rapids was 30 miles away, and their horses were back at the main entrance. Without transport, with Walsh as a prisoner and evidence to protect, their chances looked grim. Then the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. For a moment, both prepared for another fight, but as the riders drew nearer, they recognized Marshal Morrison at the head of a federal patrol. "Evidence," Morrison called out, seeing their burden. "Perfect timing. We intercepted communication about this location." As Walsh was taken into proper custody and their documents secured, Martha finally allowed herself to believe it might truly be over. The conspiracy that had claimed so many lives and destroyed countless families was finally exposed. But Morrison's next words shattered that momentary peace. "We've identified the remaining conspirators. Judge Blackwood is already in custody, but Sterling murdered 2 deputies and escaped. And there's something else. Evidence suggests the corruption runs deeper. U.S. Marshal's office has been compromised." "How deep?" Jack demanded. "We're not sure yet, but this evidence could uncover a national scandal." Martha's head spun with the implications. They'd thought they were unraveling a local crime ring, but had stumbled upon something far more extensive. The past 3 days had merely scratched the surface of years, perhaps decades, of systematic corruption. That evening, safe in her cabin, again, with federal protection posted outside, Martha sat with Jack on her porch. The stars above seemed oddly pristine after the day's violence and revelations. "We should have known," she said softly. "When corruption gets this deep, it's never just local." "We did what we could," Jack replied. "Saved each other, exposed the truth. That counts for something." "But at what cost?" Martha gestured around. "Her property. My cabin's torn apart. My reputation will be tested again. My own family betrayed me. And you came here looking for sanctuary and found a war." "Maybe," Jack admitted, "but I also found allies, friends, something I haven't had in years." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of shared experience creating its own form of peace. Finally, Martha spoke again. "Morrison thinks Sterling will come for us, for the ledger, for revenge. He wants to move us to a safer location. And you?" "This is my home," Martha said firmly. "I've done enough running, hiding, reacting. If Sterling wants to come, let him come. But we'll be ready this time No more surprises. Jack nodded his agreement. Then we stay. But we prepare better, fortify, gather our own intelligence network. As they began planning their defense, both knew this was far from over. The conspiracy they'd uncovered was like a many-headed beast, cut down one, and others emerged. But for the first time in her life, Martha didn't feel alone in her fight. The morning would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new revelations. But for now, as the Arizona night settled around them, they had each other's trust, hard-earned evidence that could change everything, and the determination to see justice done, no matter how deep the corruption ran or how high the cost. The sheriff had come with his secret, but it was the secrets Martha and Jack uncovered that would eventually bring down an empire built on stolen land, broken dreams, and murdered hope. Their story was just beginning, but the tide had turned. The hunters had become the hunted, and this time they were ready for whatever came next. 2 weeks after unmasking the conspiracy, Martha's cabin had become an informal fortress. Federal deputies rotated shifts around the perimeter, and Jack had rigged early warning bells throughout the property's approaches. Their investigation transformed into something methodical and far-reaching. "The California connection," Jack muttered one morning, studying telegraph reports spread across Martha's kitchen table. "Sterling's been funneling money through Sacramento. Banks, 3 murders linked to anyone investigating those accounts." Martha reviewed another stack of documents Morrison had couriered overnight. The Chicago connection's worse. Senator Bradley's signature appears on legislation protecting mineral rights that Walsh's shell companies bought for pennies. His wife owns stock in Highland through a third party. Their working partnership had evolved into something almost telepathic. Martha's practical insight balanced Jack's calculated risk-taking. Between them, they'd established contacts stretching from San Francisco to Boston. Journalists, reformists, honest lawmen who'd been waiting years for someone to challenge the system. "We need more than evidence," Martha concluded, closing a ledger documenting Sterling's East Coast property acquisitions. "We need leverage." The leverage arrived unexpectedly 3 days later in the form of Rebecca Hastings, a Pinkerton detective from Chicago. She'd tracked Sterling's money trail westward and discovered Martha's name in a Chicago bank's investigation. "Files, Mrs. Caldwell," Rebecca announced after showing credentials. "I believe we have mutual interests. The Pinkerton agency has been pursuing this syndicate for 18 months. Your discoveries match intelligence we've gathered independently." "Why the secrecy?" Jack asked suspiciously. "If Pinkerton's involved, why not coordinate with federal authorities?" Rebecca's laugh carried no humor. "Because our investigation suggests half the federal authorities are compromised. We've been building cases against 37 officials across 12 territories." She spread photographs across the table. Sterling meeting with government officials, shipping manifests for gold, moving through San Francisco, coded telegrams discussing property acquisitions that matched dates of suspicious deaths. "The syndicate's structure is sophisticated," Rebecca explained. "Walsh wasn't even in their inner circle, merely a middleman who got ambitious. Sterling reports to someone we've codenamed the Architect. Whoever this is, they've been orchestrating land grabs and economic manipulation for decades." Martha felt the familiar chill of larger conspiracy. "How far up does this go?" "Cabinet level, we suspect, but proving it requires more than circumstantial evidence." Jack leaned forward. "What's your agency proposing?" "Partnership. You two have proven exceptionally resourceful. We need operatives who understand the territory, who've earned local trust, people who can move freely where Pinkerton agents raise questions." Martha exchanged glances with Jack. They'd already discussed this possibility during quiet evenings planning strategy. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential impact. "What would this partnership entail?" Martha asked. "We provide resources, safe houses, secure communication, financial backing. You continue your investigation, but share everything with Pinkerton coordination. When we're ready to strike, we move simultaneously across all territories. Over the following weeks, Martha and Jack found themselves at the center of a vast intelligence operation. Martha's horse trading network became cover for moving messages between Pinkerton agents. Jack's gambling expertise proved invaluable in infiltrating Sterling's money laundering circles. Their first major break came from an unexpected source. Maria Gutierrez, formerly Benjamin Walsh's housekeeper, sought them out with documents she'd hidden since his murder. Trembling hands produced papers detailing meetings between Walsh and a mysterious visitor simply called Mr. Albany. They spoke. About railroads, Maria recalled. Senor Walsh, he was upset. Albany wanted to force sales of land where tracks would be built. The government would pay top dollar, but the original owners got nothing. Railroad speculation, the oldest game in the Western book. But this time, someone had advanced knowledge of secret government routes, using that power to steal land before construction even began. Albany, Jack mused. That's the same alias Sterling used in Denver. We're connecting the dots. Rebecca's next visit brought grave news. 2 Pinkerton agents were killed in Sacramento. They'd traced Sterling's railroad bonds to a cartel controlling 5 railways. Before they died, they telegraphed names, including your cousin Elizabeth's latest aliases. Elizabeth still active. Martha's hand tightened on her rifle. More than that, she emerged as Sterling's second-in-command. They're consolidating power, eliminating loose ends. Your existence threatens their Western operations completely. The warning proved prescient. 3 days later, Martha discovered one of her horses poisoned and property markers moved overnight, territorial violations that in Arizona often preceded violence. But something else disturbed her more. Thunder, her prize stallion, had disappeared without trace. They're testing our defenses, Jack concluded grimly, probing weaknesses before a real attack. That evening, a new intelligence report arrived. Via Pinkerton courier. Sterling had acquired a mercenary force, 20 killers led by former Confederate soldiers known for refusing surrender after the war's official end. These weren't ordinary guns for hire. They were trained professional. Killers, we need to force Sterling's hand, Martha decided. Waiting here makes us sitting targets, Jack agreed. The ledger we recovered mentioned a meeting point. Sterling uses rotating locations, but there's a pattern. They always meet near water, for quick escape routes. Analyzing Walsh's notes alongside Pinkerton intelligence, they identified Sterling's next likely rendezvous, Willow Creek, 40 miles northeast, where an abandoned ferry crossing offered multiple escape paths. The meeting was scheduled for the new moon, perfect cover for illegal activities. Rebecca initially resisted their plan to surveil Sterling directly. Too dangerous. Let our official operatives handle surveillance. Your official operatives keep dying, Martha pointed out bluntly. We have advantages, local knowledge, established cover stories, and something your agents lack, legitimate grievances anyone would understand. If we're caught observing, we're just tracking our stolen property. Rebecca finally agreed, but insisted on backup. 2 Pinkerton men would shadow them from a distance, ready to intervene if necessary. The journey to Willow Creek tested their newfound partnership. They traveled by night, using moonless periods for movement and hiding in rock canyons. During daylight, Martha's knowledge of Apache survival techniques, learned from her mother's indigenous friends, proved invaluable for concealment. At Willow Creek, they discovered Sterling hadn't come alone. 8 men occupied the abandoned ferry house, while sentries patrolled the perimeter with military precision. Most disturbing were the crates being unloaded from a supply wagon, weapons by their size and careful handling. They're arming for something big, Jack whispered from their concealed position. Through her father's old spyglass, Martha observed the meeting's participants. Sterling looked different from his banking days, harder, more dangerous. Elizabeth had adopted masculine clothing for efficiency's sake. But the third figure sent shockwaves through Martha's understanding of the conspiracy. Judge Leonard Blackwood, supposedly in custody, emerged from a covered carriage. How? Jack's confusion matched Martha's. Morrison assured us, "We've been played," Martha interrupted grimly. "Or Morrison has. That federal prisoner transfer 3 weeks ago. Blackwood must have bought his freedom with information. Their surveillance revealed troubling details. Maps spread across crude tables showed railroad routes, but also something more ambitious, territorial boundaries being redrawn. Names and dates suggested coordinated actions across the Southwest. They're planning a coup, Jack realized. Not just stealing land, but reshaping economic control of the entire territory. Elizabeth's voice carried across the night air. California's secured. Senator Bradley guarantees the territorial governor's cooperation. Once the federal marshals are replaced with our appointees, we control law enforcement completely. Sterling's response chilled them both. The Caldwell problem remains. Martha's connections to Washington journalists could expose everything prematurely. And Morrison knows too much. Killing him would raise suspicions, but framing him should suffice. "We need to warn Morrison," Martha whispered urgently, but retreating proved more dangerous than approaching. One of Sterling's sentries, making rounds, nearly stumbled over their position. In the resulting chaos, a startled deer providing convenient distraction, they slipped away, but not before overhearing Sterling's parting order: "Double the Caldwell watch. Tomorrow we will end this." The ride back stretched them to exhaustion limits. Changing horses at a friendly rancher's spread, they pushed toward Cedar Rapids, where they could telegraph warnings. But arriving at the telegraph office revealed another betrayal. The operator had mysteriously disappeared, replaced by a stranger claiming equipment failure. "They've cut our communications," Jack concluded, "isolating us before the final move." Rebecca found them at Martha's cabin that afternoon, her normally composed demeanor shattered. "My agents are being systematically arrested. Federal warrants signed by judges we've never identified as compromised. Someone high up is coordinating." The pieces crystallized into terrifying clarity. The syndicate hadn't just corrupted officials. They'd built a parallel government ready to emerge when traditional authority structures collapsed. "But they've made one crucial error," Martha said quietly. "They announced their timeline. We have until tomorrow." That night, as they fortified positions around the cabin, Martha asked Rebecca about Pinkerton's larger strategy. The detectives' answer surprised them. "We've been coordinating with British intelligence. This conspiracy has international implications. Manipulating American railroads affects global trade routes. When we move, it won't just be domestic authorities." Jack added a crucial consideration. "The mercenaries Sterling hired aren't politicians, they're soldiers. If he's bringing 20 killers tomorrow, it's not for arrests, it's elimination." They prepared accordingly. Martha's cabin sat on defensible ground, but 20 trained killers could overwhelm any fixed position. They needed mobility, surprise, and allies. Their salvation appeared from an unexpected quarter. Thunder returned at dawn, riderless but carrying a message tied to his saddle. Coordinates, a time, and a signature. Carlos Rivera, Jack's missing companion from Flagstaff. "He's alive," Jack breathed. "He's been tracking this whole situation." 2. The coordinates led to an ancient Apache stronghold, naturally fortified with narrow approaches and hidden springs. When they arrived, Carlos emerged with 20 riders, men Jack recognized from various gambling tables and legitimate enterprises across the territory. "Been gathering everyone Sterling's network wronged," Carlos explained. "Ranchers who lost land, merchants who lost contracts, lawmen who lost badges for refusing bribes. They're not armies, but they're angry, and they know how to fight. Martha felt hope rekindle. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was justice organizing itself. They spent the day planning, combining Apache tactics with cavalry maneuvers and Pinkerton's strategy. Martha's contribution proved crucial. She knew the local terrain intimately and identified choke points where Sterling's mercenaries could be divided and defeated. They think we're cornered at the cabin, Jack realized. Let's use that assumption. The ambush required precise timing. Martha and Jack would return to the cabin, present visible targets to draw Sterling's force. Carlos and his riders would position in the canyons, while Rebecca coordinated with her remaining Pinkerton agents to cut off retreat routes. As sunset painted the Arizona sky, they moved into position. Martha's cabin stood lonely in approaching darkness, lamplight visible through windows. Inside, scarecrow figures dressed in their clothes created the illusion of occupancy. Sterling's attack began at midnight. The mercenaries moved with professional efficiency, surrounding the cabin in coordinated teams. Their discipline impressed even Carlos, watching from the ridgeline. "Now," Martha signaled. Years of careful study about the land paid dividends. The attackers found themselves caught in crossfire from positions they hadn't anticipated. Apache war cries split the night as Carlos's riders charged from concealment. Pinkerton agents, using techniques developed hunting Butch Cassidy's gang, neutralized escape routes. The battle lasted 3 violent hours. Sterling's mercenaries fought skillfully, but numbers and preparation turned the tide. When dawn broke, 12 attackers were captured, 5 dead, and 3 escaped into the wilderness. But Sterling wasn't among the prisoners, nor was Elizabeth or Judge Blackwood. They watched from a distance, a captured mercenary admitted under questioning. "Sterling ain't stupid. If we failed, they'd know the true strength against them." The prisoner's revelation proved prophetic. 3 days after their victory at the cabin, Sterling resurfaced, not with violence but with a different weapon entirely. Newspapers from Chicago to New York published detailed exposés about the Arizona conspiracy, but with Martha and Jack cast as masterminds rather than victims. "They're controlling the narrative," Rebecca reported grimly. "Our own evidence is being used against us." Sterling positioned himself as the legitimate target of a complex fraud scheme. Public opinion swung wildly. Some believed Sterling's version. Others pointed to the mercenary attack as proof of his guilt. The divided response paralyzed legal proceedings. Martha studied the newspaper accounts with growing understanding. This isn't about truth anymore. It's about power. Who controls the story controls the territory. Their solution emerged from Martha's past. Her father's old journals contained correspondence with international mining families who'd been defrauded. By similar schemes in South America, these weren't just Western problems, they were global patterns of corruption. "We bypass American channels entirely," Martha proposed. "Take our evidence to British and Dutch authorities who regulate international development loans." Sterling used these foreign investments to leverage political power. Cut off his money, watch his support collapse. The strategy required travel and risk. Martha volunteered for the journey. Her family connections in Boston provided cover for European contacts. But unexpected support arrived first. Harrison Morrison appeared at their stronghold with news that shook their understanding again. "Senator Bradley's dead. Apparent suicide, but our investigators found poison that's been traced to European sources." "In fighting," Jack concluded. "The syndicate's fracturing under pressure." Rebecca added crucial intelligence. "Our overseas assets report Sterling's trying to liquidate American holdings quickly. That means either escape or escalation. The choice became stark. Stop Sterling before he vanished into international haven, or prepare for whatever desperate gambit he planned next. Their decision arrived with Sterling himself, riding alone toward their position under a white flag at sunset. His proposition was simple: Personal meeting, no weapons, no witnesses, terms for ending this war. Martha's response surprised them all. I'll meet him, but on the Apache sacred grounds, where violence is forbidden by tribal law. If he means to parley, he'll respect that tradition. The meeting place, a circle of ancient stones where water emerged from rock, held power beyond its physical boundaries. Both arrived at dawn, accompanied only by seconds for witness. Sterling looked older than weeks before, the strain visible despite his composed demeanor. Martha, this conflict has cost too much. Families destroyed, fortunes lost, people dead. On both sides, people you killed, Martha reminded him. People who stood in the way of progress. Do you think I began this conspiracy? I inherited a system already corrupting itself. I just expanded it by stealing land from families, murdering those who discovered your schemes, framing innocent people. Sterling's smile held no warmth. Innocent? Everyone has secrets, Martha. Everyone compromises. You think your father never bent laws to acquire land? Your husband never used family connections for mining permits? The only difference is scale. The difference is consent, Martha countered, and compensation, and truth. Let's speak the truth then, Sterling pressed. You've exposed our network, yes, but you can't prosecute us all. Too many officials, too much evidence buried or destroyed. Chase us, and you'll spend years in courts while more people die in retribution. Or, he paused dramatically, we can negotiate peace. The offer unfurled like a map of compromise. Partial land returns, financial restitution, selected trials for scapegoats, while the network's leaders escaped to international anonymity. Sterling presented it as pragmatic inevitability. What guarantees would prevent you from returning to your old ways? Martha asked. None, Sterling admitted with stark honesty. But neither do you have guarantees your resistance continues. Economic forces care nothing for individual battles. Tomorrow's robber. Barons replace today's. Whatever justice you seek, the truth in his words stung like venom. But staring across at Sterling, Martha recognized something, his own fear. Not of arrest or trial, but of irrelevance. His power depended on others' belief in his invincibility. Here's my counter-offer, Martha said finally. Complete confession. Every name, every scheme, every dollar. In exchange, I'll personally guarantee your passage to South America with enough wealth for modest comfort. Your empire dies, but you live. Sterling studied her carefully. And the others? Elizabeth? Blackwood? Same offer. Confess fully, get exile, refuse, and we hunt you across continents. The negotiations stretched hours as details were refined. Rebecca's Pinkerton resources would facilitate the exodus while ensuring confessions remained binding. International authorities would be notified, but not until the conspirators had departed American jurisdiction, eliminating trials that might fail or be corrupted. When Sterling finally agreed, the weight of captured empire pressed down physically. Martha signaled Jack, hidden nearby with Carlos and the others. The surrender would happen immediately, before second thoughts poisoned the agreement. But Sterling had one final revelation. The architect you've been seeking, the master planner of everything. Yes? Look closer to home, Martha. Look at who always knows where evidence can be found, who coordinates perfect timing, who brings resources exactly when needed. With those words, he produced a document from his coat. Reading it, Martha felt reality shift beneath her. The signature belonged to someone she'd trusted completely, someone who'd operated behind scenes while they pursued obvious targets. The identity of the architect changed everything, but confirming it would require one more careful move. As Sterling was secured and the long process of confessions began, Martha gathered their core group, Jack, Carlos, Rebecca, and the few federal deputies they absolutely trusted. "We have one more play," she announced grimly. "Sterling's confession names the architect, but we need independent verification, and we need to understand why someone so close to justice would orchestrate its corruption." Their final investigation led to revelations that tested every assumption about trust, justice, and the price of truth. The empire Sterling had built was crumbling, but its foundations had roots deeper and more personal than anyone suspected. As the third day of confessions ended and Sterling's associates were gathered for similar surrender, Martha stood again. On her cabin porch, the horses in the corral moved peacefully, unaware that their owner had helped reshape the territory's future. "What comes next?" Jack asked, joining her. "Truth comes next," Martha replied. "All of it, no matter how much it hurts." The American West's greatest conspiracy was unraveling, but its final secret had yet to emerge. And that secret would test not just Martha's courage, but her understanding of justice itself. Tomorrow would bring the architect's identity to light, and with it, choices that would define not just Martha's future, but the future of everyone who'd fought for truth in a land built on other people's losses. The morning of revelation dawned crisp and unnaturally clear across Arizona's high plains. Martha had barely slept, Sterling's words echoing through her mind. "Look closer to home." 4 trusted allies gathered in her cabin's main room, tension palpable as sunlight crept through shuttered windows. "Before I share what Sterling revealed," Martha began, "I need everyone's weapons on the table. We've trusted each other with our lives, but this suspicion must be resolved cleanly." Jack's brow furrowed, but he complied, placing his revolver down carefully. Carlos followed suit. Rebecca hesitated only slightly before adding her concealed derringer alongside 2 knives. Deputy Marshal Peterson, who'd guarded them through the darkest days, laid down a standard-issue Colt. Martha produced Sterling's document from her locked trunk, unfolding it slowly. The signatures ran like a ledger of betrayal, but one name dominated. The bottom page, Harrison F. Morrison, dated 6 months before Benjamin Walsh's murder. "This proves nothing," Jack said immediately. "Documents can be forged." "True," Martha agreed. "That's why I spent the night verifying. These match Morrison's. Banking records accessed through our international contacts. He's been receiving payments from Highland Investment Trust for 2 years. The silence stretched until Carlos broke it. "Marshal Morrison knew every move we made, every witness location, every evidence cache. If he gave that information to Sterling, we still have no proof," Rebecca interrupted firmly. "Professional investigators don't convict based on financial records alone." Martha retrieved another document. The night Walsh was murdered, Morrison was officially in Denver, but a hotel clerk, paid well to remember the wrong guest, now admits Morrison used an alias to travel to Prescott. He was there when Walsh died. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "The marshal saved my life 3 times. Pulled me from an ambush last year when rustlers tried to kill my whole patrol." "That's his genius," Martha explained. "Create loyalty through selective heroism." Harrison Morrison wasn't Walsh's protector gone wrong. He was the conductor orchestrating a symphony of corruption. Sterling, Walsh, Blackwood, all instruments he played. Why reveal himself now? Jack's question struck at the core mystery. Because Sterling cracked under pressure. Their system required different personalities. Sterling's brutality, Walsh's respectability, Blackwood's legal authority. But Morrison, he's the patient one. The planner. When Sterling proved unstable, Morrison used us to clean house. Rebecca had been studying Morrison's financial transactions. These payments correspond to every major foreclosure in 5 territories. Not random, strategic. He targeted families with specific knowledge or connections. Your family, Martha, had mining records that could have exposed the whole scheme. The train dynamite, Carlos added darkly. 6 months ago, set by men we never caught. They were targeting a shipment of court documents about mineral rights. Morrison tipped them off. The cabin's atmosphere grew suffocating. Every savior became suspect. Every heroic action revealed ulterior motivation. Martha set aside the documents and began pacing. Sterling's confession names 37 officials, and Morrison appears as either their protector or their judge. He's been playing both sides so perfectly that when corruption was exposed, he positioned himself as the investigating authority. "So what now?" Peterson asked hoarsely. "We can't arrest a federal marshal without overwhelming evidence, and if we move prematurely, he'll vanish," Jack finished, "like Sterling's already trying to do. The strategy they developed required precision beyond anything attempted before." Morrison had to be isolated from his network, cut off from escape routes, and confronted with evidence he couldn't dismiss or destroy. Rebecca outlined her contribution. "Pinkerton has been investigating Morrison independently, though we didn't share that suspicion even among ourselves. Our agency believes he murdered 3 of our detectives over the past year. Agent Wilkes was my partner. Died supposedly of natural causes while investigating Colorado mining fraud. They spent that day preparing an intricate trap. Morrison would be invited to Martha's cabin under the pretext of coordinating Sterling's full confession. The location was chosen deliberately, far from federal oversight, where Morrison's authority meant nothing among the assembled private citizens and Pinkerton operatives. As the sun began its descent, tension mounted. Morrison's approach was announced. By lookouts positioned 2 miles out, he rode alone, presumably confident in his invincibility or ignorant of their discovery. The marshal dismounted with his usual crisp efficiency, ground-tying his horse before striding to the porch where Martha waited. "Mrs. Caldwell," he greeted her formally, "your message suggested urgency regarding Sterling's admissions." "Indeed," Martha replied, matching his tone. "There are things he's revealed that require private discussion." Inside, the cabin's main room had been arranged deliberately. Chairs faced each other in conversation style, but positioned to block easy escape. Jack stood by the window, Carlos by the rear door. Rebecca sat, seemingly casual, but within reach of her weapon. Peterson lingered by the fireplace, conflicted loyalty readable in his tense posture. Morrison accepted coffee Martha offered, commenting on its quality as he had dozens of times before. This careful maintenance of normalcy continued until he'd settled into the prepared seat. "Sterling has confessed to multiple murders," Martha began slowly. "But he claims he acted under direction, that someone orchestrated the entire conspiracy from above." "Expected," Morrison nodded. "Criminals often try to shift blame when caught. Have his claims produced any verifiable leads?" Martha placed the first document before him. "These verify Sterling's banking relationships with Highland Investment. Trust. They also reveal payments to federal officials, which is why I needed this meeting isolated from standard channels." Morrison studied the papers with apparent concern. "Deeply disturbing. These officials will need immediate investigation. I can coordinate, including yourself?" Martha interrupted, sliding Sterling's final confession forward. The marshal's composure cracked for just 1 second, a minute tensing of his jaw muscles that betrayed shock. But he recovered immediately, reaching for the document with steady hands. "Sterling's naming me as part of his network." Morrison's voice carried surprised indignation perfectly. "I'm the one who's been investigating—" "For 2 years, Martha interrupted again. 2 years during which you systematically protected his operation while appearing to pursue justice. Sterling, Walsh, Blackwood, they were your public faces while you remained the shadowed architect." Morrison set down the document carefully. His eyes evaluated every person in the room, calculating odds with mathematical precision. "This is A serious accusation, Mrs. Caldwell, based on a desperate man's attempts to deflect guilt. Based on evidence, Rebecca corrected, producing Pinkerton files, including proof you murdered my partner, and forged documents that caused the Three Rivers bank collapse, killing 12 families through suicide or starvation. What's your evidence against the word of federal law enforcement? Morrison's question tested their resolve. Senator Bradley's real suicide note, Jack answered, producing a paper hidden before his official death, names you specifically as his handler, describes how you used his gambling debts to control his votes, the missing gold shipments from Colorado, Carlos added, which you investigated yourself, declaring them lost to bandits. Shipments now traced to accounts you control. Morrison's hand moved slightly toward his weapon, but Peterson stepped forward. Don't, sir. We've rode together too long for this to end in violence. The standoff stretched until Morrison asked quietly, what happens now? A citizen's arrest? Vigilante? Justice? Federal justice, Rebecca answered. The War Department's Secret Service has been building a parallel case. They offered full amnesty to any conspirator, providing complete cooperation against higher-ranking officials. For the first time, Morrison's control fractured completely. Higher ranking? I'm the highest ranking. Who do you think? But his slip revealed nothing concrete. Martha had anticipated this. The international connections trouble us most, she pressed. British and Dutch authorities have frozen accounts linked to your aliases. European governments are demanding explanations for misused development loans. If you seek any mercy, full cooperation is required. Morrison's negotiation skills emerged as he probed for advantages. 2 hours of careful discussion revealed his methodology, how he'd infiltrated legitimate systems, corrupted them slowly, then used reform efforts to cover evidence of his manipulation. I calculated the territory's political dynamics perfectly, he admitted with almost academic pride. Federal presence too weak, local corruption too entrenched, economic growth rapid enough to hide systematic theft. My error was underestimating individual determination. Your error was trusting Sterling with execution, Jack corrected. Greed made him visibly brutal. You required subtlety he couldn't provide. The confrontation's climax came when Morrison produced his own final revelation. You think catching me solves everything. I was indeed the territory's architect, but my blueprints came from elsewhere. Look at how federal policy shaped Western development. Look at which businesses received government contracts. Look at sudden price changes in Eastern markets affecting frontier suppliers. Rebecca leaned forward. You're claiming a conspiracy above the territorial level. I'm stating economic reality. The territory's resources were always destined for Eastern control. I merely accelerated the inevitable while ensuring some wealth remained here. He fixed Martha with an intense stare. Your family's land? That was federal survey teams marking mineral deposits worth millions. The foreclosure ensured those deposits stayed domestic rather than selling to European interests. The justification rang hollow, but raised unsettling questions about larger systemic issues. Martha pushed aside these philosophical challenges to focus on immediate justice. Your choices were your own, she declared firmly. The methods you used, murder, fraud, framing innocence, cannot be justified by economic theories. Morrison's arrest proceeded without further resistance. Federal deputies, carefully selected ones trusted by the War Department, arrived to transport him east for trial. His departure left power vacuums across the territory, but also cleared space for legitimate governance. In the weeks following, Martha and her allies navigated the aftermath. Federal investigators arrived to untangle decades of corruption. The ledgers Morrison surrendered revealed schemes spanning the continent. The restored land claims required months of validation, but families began returning to ancestral properties. Martha accepted the return of her family's acreage, but chose to maintain focus on her horse breeding operation. Some wounds heal better when left to nature, she explained to disappointed land agents. Jack's reputation cleared completely. He accepted an offer to establish a fair gambling house in Cedar Rapids, honest gaming being rarer than gold in frontier towns. His partnership with Carlos developed into a legitimate enterprise, supporting various reconstruction efforts. Most surprisingly, Elizabeth survived her father's downfall to seek reconciliation. She approached Martha 3 months after the trials began, carrying documents proving her own attempts to prevent the worst violence. "I wasn't innocent," Elizabeth admitted during their private meeting, "but I thought I could control events from inside. When I realized the depth of brutality Sterling demanded, I tried to warn people, including you." "The mysterious woman who warned Walsh," Martha realized. "That was you." "He wouldn't cooperate. Called me sentimental. By then, I was trapped between family loyalty and moral awakening. Whether to trust this reconstruction of events remained an open question, but Martha chose measured forgiveness. "Justice serves better than vengeance," she decided. "Stay away from my property, but you're not my enemy anymore." The territory's transformation stretched beyond simple law enforcement. Rebecca's Pinkerton investigation revealed patterns of corruption in military contracting that reached Washington's highest levels. The resulting reforms reshaped federal governance throughout the West. 6 months after the conspiracy's exposure, Martha stood at her cabin's newly repaired porch, watching sunrise paint the Arizona landscape. Jack joined her, setting down 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Still processing everything?" he asked. "The scale still surprises me," Martha admitted. "How one person could orchestrate such complexity. How many lives were diverted, ended, or diminished by his actions? And how close he came to succeeding completely. Success would have looked different anyway. Some other architect would have emerged. Morrison was right about economic forces at work beyond individual control. So we did nothing? We restored choice," Martha countered. "That's something. Families can build their futures now without invisible hands stealing from their efforts. Truth creates its own value." The conversation shifted to more personal matters. Their shared experience had forged unexpected bonds. Jack had proven himself honorable under extreme pressure. Their working relationship had evolved into something neither fully understood yet. "The War Department offered me a position," Jack mentioned casually, "investigating financial crimes across territories. They want someone who understands both numbers and people." "Will you take it?" "Depends. They'd let me work from anywhere. Question is whether there's a home worth staying near." Martha considered. This, her cabin, had become more than isolation. It represented victory over forces that thrived on separation and mistrust. Building connections seemed appropriate evolution. "I'm expanding the horse breeding operation," she said carefully. "Need someone reliable for business travel, negotiating sales, someone who reads people well and handles numbers. Might be interested if the offer included appropriate accommodation." Their unspoken understanding crystallized into firm ground. The past's shadows had taught them trust's true value. What they built next would honor those lessons. That evening, they reviewed Morrison's full confession one final time. His revelations extended to identifying corrupt officials in 12 territories, exposing railroad manipulation that artificially inflated land values and detailing systems still operating under other architects' control. "The scale overwhelms," Carlos commented, joining them with legal documents requiring signatures. "How do we ensure this never repeats?" "We can't," Rebecca answered pragmatically, "but we can maintain vigilance, ensure transparency, build communities that resist corruption through knowledge and connection. Peterson added his perspective. The badge means something again. For years, lawmen were viewed with suspicion, rightfully so. Morrison poisoned that well deeper than anyone realized. Rebuilding trust matters more than punishing every guilty party. As night fell, plans solidified for the territory's future. Martha's expanded horse operation would employ former conspirators' victims, providing livelihood built on honest work. Jack's gaming establishment would donate percentage profits to educating frontier children, preventing future manipulation through literacy and knowledge. Rebecca announced Pinkerton's expansion into the territory, focusing on financial crimes that preceded political corruption. Catch economic fraud early enough, you prevent violence later. Their alliance had evolved from desperate survival into structured reform. The architect's empire crumbled not through single heroic action, but sustained community pressure. But one question lingered: Morrison's vague references to forces above territorial authority. The War Department's investigation hinted at congressional involvement, but evidence remained circumstantial. "Do we pursue those leads?" Jack asked, as they prepared to separate for evening duties. Martha considered carefully. "We pursue truth, wherever it leads. But remember, monsters exist in all systems. The key is ensuring good people have enough strength to resist them." As their first major victory solidified into lasting change, Martha reflected on the journey's personal costs. Her isolation had been shattered, but the community formed through adversity proved stronger than solitude ever offered. The frontier's future remained unwritten, but its authors would include voices long suppressed by fear and manipulation. Morrison's legacy would be cautionary tale rather than continuing oppression. That night, after her guests departed, Martha performed one final ritual. She built a small fire and fed it papers, evidence copies no longer needed, documents that had governed their actions for months. The past burned away, leaving space for whatever came next. The architect's identity had shocked, but discovering the truth had proven liberating. As Arizona's stars appeared overhead, Martha knew their story represented something larger than personal vengeance or local corruption. They'd proven that individual courage, properly supported, could reshape entire systems. The battle for the American West soul continued, but its defenders stood stronger, having faced and defeated the darkness within their own ranks. The empire had fallen. What rose next would be built on foundations of truth, transparency, and the hard-earned trust of people who'd learned to look beyond surface appearance to recognize genuine integrity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but the tools for meeting them had been forged in the fire of this ordeal. The architect's grand design had failed because he'd miscalculated the most important variable: the human spirit's refusal to accept corruption as inevitable. Justice, as Martha had insisted throughout. Their journey was worth every risk taken to achieve it, and the territory they'd helped save would remember that lesson for generations to come. 6 months after Morrison's arrest and the unraveling of his conspiracy, the Arizona territory was experiencing its first genuine economic boom. Martha stood at the edge of her expanded property, watching workers construct the new stable complex that would house 60 breeding mares. Jack approached on horseback, returning from a successful purchasing expedition in Santa Fe. "The Navajo breeder in Gallup agreed to trade," Jack announced as he dismounted. 3 stallions for our spring colts, plus mineral rights consultation. Their tribes have mining knowledge Morrison's network never discovered. Martha smiled at the irony. The very communities they'd once feared would hinder settlement now proved essential to honest development. Carlos telegraphed from Denver. "The railroad officials want our horses for their mountain routes. Legitimate contract, no hidden clauses." "Progress feels strange after so much corruption," Jack admitted, unsaddling his mount. Their operation had become a model for transparent business practices. Every transaction was documented publicly, profits distributed fairly among workers and investors, but success brought its own challenges. That afternoon brought trouble disguised as opportunity. A delegation arrived from Washington, 3 men, in expensive suits leading a dozen cavalry escorts. Their leader, Senator William Chadwick, carried presidential credentials and an air of authority that immediately raised Martha's guard. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Morrison," Chadwick addressed them formally as they gathered in Martha's main house. "Your victory over corruption has reached the highest levels of government. President Cleveland himself suggested I consult with you about territorial reforms." "Reforms for what purpose?" Martha asked directly. "Development acceleration. The territory's proven resources exceed initial estimates. Copper, silver, and untapped grazing land could support 10 times current population. We're proposing a rapid settlement initiative." Jack exchanged glances with Martha. Rapid development had been Morrison's justification for his crimes. "Development without infrastructure breeds corruption," he observed carefully. "Which is why we need your oversight," Chadwick insisted. "Your investigation revealed gaps in federal administration. We want to implement your recommendations before major investment arrives." But something felt wrong. Rebecca's training had taught Martha to distrust perfectly timed solutions. After the delegation left, she shared concerns with their allies. "I can investigate their backgrounds," Rebecca offered, now heading Pinkerton's territorial office. "Though federal authorities don't appreciate private investigation of their own." "The cavalry escort worries me," Carlos admitted. 12 soldiers for administrative visits, that's suppression strength, not protection detail. Peterson, who'd been reinstated as a legitimate federal deputy, brought disturbing news the following morning. Chadwick's delegation didn't follow standard protocols. They bypassed the territorial governor, ignored local military command. They're operating outside normal chains. Martha's instincts, honed by months of conspiracy hunting, screamed warnings. She proposed a counter-investigation strategy. "We accept their meeting tomorrow, but gather our own intelligence. Jack, your gambling contacts in Santa Fe might have useful gossip about Washington politics. Rebecca, check if Pinkerton has files on Chadwick. Carlos, monitor troop movements discreetly." The investigation bore fruit faster than expected. Jack returned at twilight with troubling reports. Chadwick's been buying up mining futures through shell companies, same pattern as Morrison's operation, preparing to profit from development he'll authorize. Rebecca's findings were equally concerning. Pinkerton flagged Senator Chadwick 6 months ago for unusual wealth accumulation. His net worth tripled after supporting certain territorial appointments, the same officials Morrison corrupted. But Carlos brought the most immediate threat. Cavalry detachments have surrounded the valley. They're positioning as if expecting confrontation, not cooperation. Martha called an emergency meeting at midnight. Their victory over Morrison's conspiracy had apparently identified them as threats to ongoing federal corruption. "We're being tested," she concluded grimly. "They want to know if we'll cooperate with new corruption or resist again." Jack proposed bold action. "We turn the trap against them." Tomorrow's meeting becomes our opportunity to expose their scheme publicly. The plan required careful orchestration. Martha would wear a concealed recording device, telegraph wire adapted by the technical-minded miner Peterson had befriended. Rebecca arranged for Pinkerton operators to position outside the meeting location, ready to witness any attempted intimidation or violence. Dawn brought Chadwick's return with additional advisors, men whose expensive tailoring couldn't hide their rough backgrounds. Martha recognized the pattern: legitimate authority fronting for criminal enforcement. "I've considered your proposal," Martha announced as they assembled in her meeting room. "Before discussing terms, I need clarification about federal oversight." Of private property rights, Chadwick's smile didn't reach his eyes. Rights are guaranteed naturally, though eminent domain applies when national interests supersede individual claims. And who determines national interest? Appropriate committees, influenced by territorial representatives, which we hope to number you among. The web of compromise began weaving immediately. They offered Martha territorial land commission leadership, Jack authority over gaming regulation, Carlos government contracts for his transportation business. Each position is carefully structured to ensure enrichment through corrupt practices. Your experience with the previous administration makes you uniquely qualified, one advisor pressed. You understand both the system's flaws and necessary flexibility. Martha's recording wire captured every word as they outlined the planned corruption, federal surveys, discovering minerals beneath private property requiring seizure, development contracts awarded to shell companies at inflated prices, railroad, routes determined by bribery rather than geography. The territory's wealth belongs to its people, another advisor explained with practiced sincerity. We're merely ensuring efficient distribution. Efficient to whom? Jack challenged. Your pocket companies? Tension electrified the room. Chadwick's hand moved toward his coat, but Martha raised her palm. Before you resort to threats, consider carefully. She triggered a previously arranged signal, 3 sharp taps on the table. Through windows they could see Rebecca's operators taking positions with cameras and witness documentation. Peterson appeared in the doorway with federal warrants approved by uncorrupted judges. These conversations have been recorded, Peterson announced. You gentlemen are under arrest for attempted bribery, conspiracy to defraud, and threatening federal witnesses. Chadwick's shock transformed to rage. You dare? The president himself has been kept ignorant by intermediaries like yourself, Martha interrupted. Your authority equals Morrison's, manufactured through deception and enforced through intimidation. The arrest proceeded differently than previous confrontations. No violence erupted, but the cavalry detachment's true purpose emerged when their commanding officer refused Peterson's authority. Senator Chadwick holds executive emergency powers. You're interfering with national security operations. Jack stepped forward calmly. Then perhaps you'd like to explain those powers to the newspaper correspondents who've been summoned, or the War Department investigators secretly monitoring this operation. The officers' confidence cracked. The federal corruption they'd exposed had triggered multiple investigations. Chadwick's mission was actually a desperate attempt to secure territorial wealth before larger reforms exposed the Washington networks. By sunset, federal judges had processed the arrests and ordered immediate investigation of Chadwick's congressional colleagues. The cavalry, relieved of corrupt leadership, offered protection rather than threat. Martha's property became temporary headquarters for legitimate federal oversight. In the following weeks, deeper patterns emerged. Chadwick represented one of 7 congressional cartels controlling Western development through modified versions of Morrison's tactics. The exposure triggered nationwide reforms exceeding Morrison's territorial impact. We've stumbled into something larger than territorial corruption, Rebecca reported during one strategy meeting. These cartels have been redirecting federal Indian policy, manipulating statehood applications, and controlling territorial courts since the Civil War ended. Martha felt the weight of responsibility shift. Their horse operation had become a symbol of honest enterprise in a territory starved for genuine leadership. Delegations arrived weekly seeking advice on resisting corruption, building transparent businesses, and establishing legitimate governance. I became a horse breeder, not a political reformer, Martha commented privately to Jack one evening as they reviewed the endless requests for consultation. Sometimes circumstances choose our roles, Jack replied philosophically. Morrison turned us into corruption fighters. Chadwick proved we can't return to isolation. The realization shaped their future decisions. They established the Territorial Reform Alliance, combining their investigative experience with legitimate business practices. The alliance offered consulting for developing enterprises, investigation support for suspicious contracts, and mediation between federal authority and local interests. 3 months after Chadwick's arrest, the Territorial Reform Alliance faced its first major test. Development companies with seemingly clean credentials requested alliance endorsement for a massive irrigation project. The engineering benefits appeared genuine, but Martha's investigative instincts detected underlying problems. The company president claims Harvard engineering education, but transcripts show he attended 1 semester before dismissal, Rebecca discovered. The chief investor appears in Morrison's old files as a Colorado mining fraudster, yet legitimate water management could transform the territory's agricultural potential. Martha proposed innovative due diligence. We'll support the project, but require transparent accounting and independent engineering review. Alliance reputation depends on distinguishing legitimate development from disguised theft. The company initially resisted transparency requirements. When they threatened to pursue federal approval exclusively, Martha shared evidence of their previous fraud with territorial newspapers. Public pressure forced compliance or withdrawal. They chose compliance, and the irrigation project proceeded honestly. Its success attracted more legitimate developers willing to meet alliance standards. Within months, the territory's economic growth paralleled development while maintaining ethical practices. But success bred new enemies. Anonymous threats appeared at the property, warnings that reformers would meet Morrison's fate, prison or worse. The threats graduated to attempts at intimidation when a hired gunslinger arrived in Cedar Rapids, asking pointed questions about Martha and Jack's whereabouts. The alliance responded with community protection networks. Citizens who'd benefited from honest development provided early warning systems. Jack's renovated gaming house became a legitimate gathering place where strangers couldn't establish threatening positions without notice. "They want us afraid," Martha declared during a town meeting. Fear maintained Morrison's power and Chadwick's confidence. "We respond with visibility and solidarity." The strategy culminated in a dramatic confrontation 6 months later. 3 experienced killers, hired by still-operating corruption networks, attempted simultaneous assault on alliance leaders, but the community's vigilance detected their preparation phase rather than secret elimination. The killers found themselves surrounded by armed citizens, ranchers, merchants, even reformed criminals seeking honest lives. The would-be assassins surrendered without firing shots, their confessions revealing patterns of retaliation against corruption fighters across the frontier. Federal authorities responded decisively. The assassination attempts proved the existence of organized attempts to reverse reform. Washington implemented new policies protecting territorial reformers, offering federal protection for legitimate investigations of official misconduct. Martha's final challenge emerged not from external threats but internal growth. The Territorial Reform Alliance expanded beyond her intended scope, encompassing concerns from water rights to native sovereignty, railroad regulation to immigration policy. The scale overwhelmed her intended focus on preventing economic corruption. "We've created something larger than ourselves," she confided to Jack during a particularly exhausting week of delegations. "I wanted justice for my family's stolen land. Now we're arbitrating territorial policy." Jack's response reflected their strengthened partnership. "The territory needs us, not because we're perfect, but because we proved corruption can be defeated. Every settlement prevented, every honest contract facilitated, changes the frontier's future." Their relationship had evolved beyond alliance into partnership in every sense. One evening, as they reviewed development proposals by lamplight, Jack posed an unexpected question. If someone had told you 6 months ago that hiding a fugitive would lead to territorial reform, would you have opened your door? No, Martha admitted honestly. Fear would have kept me isolated. And if someone told that fugitive his freedom would come at the cost of anonymity forever, you'd have fled faster, she guessed. I'd have hidden better, Jack corrected. But losing anonymity gained me something more valuable: purpose and partnership. The admission hung between them, unspoken implications clear. Their alliance had transformed into deep mutual respect, trust forged through shared danger, and affection developed through consistent support. The isolation served its purpose, Martha acknowledged. But community, real community, not imposed. Development offers strength I'd forgotten existed. Their conversation was interrupted by late riders bearing urgent news. Federal investigations had uncovered a 7th cartel attempting massive territorial fraud before reforms could be fully implemented. The scheme involved false mineral surveys across 50,000 acres, threatening dozens of legitimate homesteads. Martha's response revealed her transformation from isolated horse breeder to frontier leader. We've defended against attack. Now, we pursue justice proactively. These cartels operate through fear. Let's show them the strength of organized resistance. The final campaign against corruption began not with violence, but meticulous investigation. The Territorial Reform Alliance, grown to include honest officials across the territory, documented every suspicious land claim and mineral survey. Federal reformers shared evidence connecting the 7th cartel to previous schemes. When arrests finally came, they swept across state lines, implicating senators, judges, and businessmen in a web of fraud exceeding Morrison's territorial operation. The territorial reforms had catalyzed national change, proving systematic corruption could be challenged successfully. 6 months after facing down the hired killers, Martha stood again at her property's edge, surveying transformation. The stable expansion housed 60 breeding mares as planned. The training facilities attracted buyers from 3 territories, but more importantly, the landscape showed honest development. Family farms, legitimate mining operations, fair timber, contracts spreading across the valley. Jack joined her as had become their evening custom. The Denver newspaper called us architects of the New West, he mentioned. Ironic terminology. Morrison built empires on stolen foundations, Martha reflected. We're building communities on honest ground. The terminology only ironic to those who think all architects must profit from destruction. Their success story spread beyond territorial boundaries. Reform alliances formed in Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, applying lessons from Arizona's experience. The frontier's development shifted toward transparency, community benefit, and sustainable practice. But Martha knew the work remained incomplete. Corruption adapted like desert plants to harsh conditions, finding new methods to exploit systems. Designed for progress, vigilance, not victory, would characterize their future. What comes next? Jack asked, echoing her thoughts. We maintain what we've built, Martha decided. Support others fighting similar battles. Ensure the territory's children learn that courage and community can defeat any conspiracy. As stars appeared over the Arizona landscape, Martha reflected on an unexpected journey from isolation to influence. The fugitive cowboy who'd stumbled to her door had brought more than danger. He'd carried a catalyst for transformation she'd never anticipated. The sheriff had indeed come with a secret, but the revelation had ultimately strengthened rather than destroyed. Truth, as always, proved more powerful than the lies meant to protect false empires. And in their unlikely partnership, Martha and Jack had discovered that frontier justice worked best when built on foundations of community trust rather than individual vendetta. The American West's corruption had lost its most successful architect, But the territory had gained builders of honest prosperity. As they walked back to the cabin, plans forming for tomorrow's challenges, both knew their story represented more than personal triumph. It marked the dawn of authentic progress for the entire frontier. 1 year after Morrison's empire crumbled, a different kind of rider approached Martha's cabin. This time, the dust cloud revealed 12 horses pulling wagons loaded with families, not threats. The caravan had traveled from Wyoming, settlers seeking the Arizona territory that promised fair dealing and honest opportunity. Mrs. Caldwell, their leader, called out, a woman with a sun-worn face and determined eyes. "We read about your Territorial Reform Alliance in the territorial papers. Is it true what they say, that land claims here are honored fairly?" Martha stepped onto her porch, recognizing the hope mixed with wariness in the settlers' expressions. "It's true," she confirmed, "but scrutiny remains necessary. No territory's immune to corruption's resurrection." Jack emerged from the stable, leading Thunder, now a prized stud whose offspring commanded premium prices for their strength and temperament. The symbolic power wasn't lost on anyone. Stolen property restored, now producing legitimate wealth. "The Reform Alliance maintains open records," Jack added, approaching the wagon train. "Every claim filed, every contract signed, documented. For public review, transparency prevents darkness from returning." The settlers' arrival marked the 23rd group to seek out the territory specifically for its reformed practices. Each arrival strengthened the legitimate economy while increasing pressure to maintain ethical standards. Success bred both confidence and caution. That evening, after helping the newcomers establish a temporary camp, Martha found herself alone with her thoughts. Her cabin, once a fortress of isolation, had become a symbol of resilience and integrity. The transformation felt simultaneously earned and surreal. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity," she admitted to Jack when he joined her on the porch with coffee grown from territory's new agricultural cooperative. Before hidden enemies, before responsibility for others' futures. Simpler, maybe, but not better, Jack reflected, his comfort with introspection and development over months of partnership. Isolation protects you from hurt, but also from purpose. Morrison's presence forced discovery of corruption, but also of your own capacity to fight it. The observation struck deep. Martha had spent 5 years after her husband's death believing that safety lay in separation. The desperate cowboy's arrival had shattered that illusion, while revealing strength she'd buried beneath grief and self-protection. Their conversation was interrupted by Peterson's arrival, bearing federal correspondence. The deputy's presence had become regular as he coordinated between reformed territorial governance and still suspect federal oversight. "Washington's requesting full accounting of the alliance's investigative methods," Peterson announced, handing over official documents. "Not a hostile inquiry. They want to replicate our success elsewhere. Oregon's approaching statehood with similar corruption patterns we faced." Martha reviewed the request carefully. The federal government's acknowledgement of their methods validated months of work while raising new questions about expansion. "We're not prepared for franchise reform. Our methods evolved organically, responding to specific threats." "True," Rebecca agreed, arriving with Pinkerton's monthly security assessment. "But refusing to share knowledge makes us complicit in others' suffering. Morrison's conspirators operated across territories, so must solutions." The debate continued through the evening, revealing the group's core philosophy. They dismantled local corruption through community action, transparent accountability, and refusal to compromise fundamental ethics. But scaling those principles required careful consideration of varying territorial conditions. "Each frontier has unique challenges," Carlos contributed, joining them after securing his latest supply run from Santa Fe. What worked here needs adaptation for mountain territories, coastal regions, areas with different indigenous relationships. The discussion crystallized a new direction for the Reform Alliance. Rather than direct replication, they developed principles and methodologies transferable to local contexts. Training programs for investigators, transparency frameworks for governance, community vigilance networks, tools others could adapt. 3 months into this new phase, an unexpected challenge emerged. Elizabeth Parker, reconciled cousin turned legitimate businesswoman, arrived with disturbing news from the East. Wall Street analysts are watching the territory, she reported during a private meeting with Martha and Jack. Economic journals call the Arizona experiment inefficient but intriguing. Some financiers see opportunity, others view transparency as a threat to quick profits. Let them watch, Martha responded. Markets require integrity for sustainable growth. It's more complicated, Elizabeth pressed. Major investment firms are positioning for Western Railroad expansion. They prefer Morrison's methods, faster returns, fewer complications. If the territory doesn't attract sufficient capital, legitimate development could stall, making residents vulnerable to regressive promises. The dilemma haunted Martha. Their ethical stance risked practical consequences. Rebuilding infrastructure, expanding education, providing health care, all required significant investment. But attracting capital without compromising principles demanded innovation. Jack proposed a bold solution. We create our own investment cooperative. Rather than depend on external capital with hidden agendas, we attract ethical investors who accept reasonable returns for sustainable development. The concept evolved into the Western Frontier Investment Cooperative, drawing initial capital from restored families, honest businessmen, and even reformed criminals seeking legitimate investment opportunities. Instead of speculative exploitation, the cooperative funded projects benefiting territorial residents while generating modest but reliable returns. 6 months later, the cooperative's first major project, a rail spur connecting isolated mining communities to main lines, demonstrated viability. Local labor, fair wages, and community ownership created stakeholder investment in success rather than quick extraction followed by abandonment. But not all adaptation proved simple. The territory's indigenous presence, historically marginalized or actively displaced by corruption schemes, required sensitive engagement. Martha's property bordered tribal lands that Morrison's network had repeatedly attempted to seize through fraudulent treaties. We've corrected specific frauds, she acknowledged, during a crucial meeting with tribal leaders, but colonial systems remain. The Reform Alliance must address historical injustices while building equitable futures. The indigenous representatives, led by Sarah Runningwolf, whose grandfather had lost tribal lands to Walsh's foreclosure schemes, proposed groundbreaking cooperation. Joint sovereignty over disputed territories, Sarah suggested. Shared governance that respects traditional practices while enabling economic development benefiting all residents. The alliance proved corruption can be defeated. Now prove systems can be rebuilt. The proposal challenged Martha's assumptions about property rights, governance, and justice. Implementing such radical change required careful negotiation with federal authorities, some still resistant to recognizing indigenous sovereignty. The territory's transformation invites reimagining fundamental relationships, Rebecca observed as they crafted proposals. We dismantled Morrison's theft. Now we must construct something previously unbuilt. The joint sovereignty experiment began with 500 acres adjacent to Martha's property. Tribal wisdom regarding water management combined with modern agricultural techniques created sustainable practices neither culture achieved alone. The success attracted federal attention, both supportive reformers and nervous administrators fearing precedent. Meanwhile, Jack's transformed gambling house evolved into the territory's first educational center focused on financial literacy and legal rights. Former card players taught mathematics, reformed con artists explained fraud detection. Jack himself developed a curriculum connecting numerical analysis with practical applications. Education prevents future Morrisons, he explained to visiting journalists, documenting the territory's progress. When citizens understand systems, they recognize manipulation. The center's influence spread as graduates returned to communities with tools for resisting corruption. Many had been Morrison's victims. Now they became the territory's strongest defenders against future schemes. But progress attracted both admiration and enmity. On the anniversary of Morrison's arrest, a mysterious fire destroyed Jack's educational center. Evidence pointed to professional arson, though perpetrators vanished before identification. The community's response demonstrated transformation. Rather than intimidation creating fear, destruction unified resistance. Within weeks, contributions poured in, materials, labor, expertise, to rebuild the center stronger. Former students, now teachers themselves, expanded operations across the territory. "You cannot burn knowledge already spread," Martha declared at the rebuilt center's dedication. "Every person educated becomes immune to deceit." The territory's reformation reached a pivotal moment when Washington introduced the Arizona Statehood Act. The federal legislation proposed boundaries, governance structures, and economic frameworks requiring local approval. Hidden within comprehensive reforms lay amendments that could undo anti-corruption measures. "They're trying to bury our accountability systems in bureaucracy," Jack discovered after reviewing hundreds of pages. Standard federal oversight would replace transparent local mechanisms. The alliance mobilized for its greatest challenge. They needed to influence federal legislation without compromising principles that had already succeeded. Allies in Congress, representatives, convinced by territorial success, helped, but powerful interests sought to limit precedent-threatening nationwide corruption. Martha testified before congressional committees, her testimony carrying the weight of proven results. The Arizona Territory demonstrates that transparency doesn't inhibit development, it enhances it, she argued. Legitimate investors prefer clarity over hidden agendas. Residents support systems that protect their interests fairly. Evidence overwhelmed opposition. Economic growth, despite modest returns, proved sustainable. Crime reduction, though requiring constant vigilance, saved significant enforcement costs. Educational advancement prepared future generations for honest citizenship. The final statehood bill incorporated Arizona's reforms while allowing flexibility for local adaptation. It became a template for bringing other territories into union with strengthened governance. 2 years after the Fugitive Cowboys' desperate arrival, Martha stood watching Arizona's first state governor take oath. The ceremony occurred on steps of the territorial capital, with Jack beside her, officially her husband for 3 months now, though their partnership had solidified long before formal recognition. "Remember when survival meant isolation?" she murmured to him as dignitaries spoke of progress. "Isolation died when you opened your door," Jack replied softly. "Everything else followed that choice." The governor, a woman from Phoenix whose ranching family had lost land to Walsh's schemes, acknowledged territorial transformers. Martha and Jack received public commendation, though both knew naming individual heroes contradicted their community-focused philosophy. "The territory's people rebuilt themselves," the governor declared. "Individual courage sparked necessary change, but collective action sustained it." Later that evening, as celebration subsided, Martha found a quiet moment at her property's edge. The view had changed subtly but profoundly. Farms replacing empty land, honest mines extracting wealth fairly, railroads connecting rather than dividing communities. Carlos approached with final news. The federal investigation concluded Morrison will spend life in prison. 15 co-conspirators received various sentences. The Washington networks are unraveling. Our evidence helped. Prosecute officials in 17 states. And Sterling? Martha asked, remembering the first betrayer whose confession started larger unraveling. Testified against others, then disappeared into South America. The government's tracking, but prioritizes active threats. His empire's dismantled. That's the main victory. Elizabeth joined them, her reformation complete but still surprising. Father would be proud, Martha, not of Morrison's fate, but of how you transformed loss into purpose. The comment referred to both fathers, Elizabeth's who'd lost faith after family land theft, and Martha's who'd battled corruption till death ended his struggle. Neither man had lived to see victory, but daughters carried their principles forward as Arizona's first stars appeared, seemingly brighter in territory cleaned of systemic deception. Martha reflected on transformation's price. Grief for her husband had created isolation that preserved her until the crisis needed strength. The fugitive cowboy's appearance shattered safety while revealing purpose. "What comes next?" Jack asked as they walked back to their cabin. Guests. Departing. We guard what we've built, Martha decided. Corruption adapts like desert life, finding moisture in rock, growing new roots when old are severed. Eternal vigilance matters more than any single victory. Then we maintain vigilance together, Jack confirmed. Their cabin had evolved from sanctuary into headquarters, but some aspects remained unchanged. Thunder still commanded his corral with noble presence. Martha's coffee still started mornings. With a familiar ritual, the Arizona landscape still tested human endurance with magnificent indifference, but people had changed everything. The isolated widow and desperate gambler had become partners in reformation. The broken systems they'd exposed now served examples of what transparency and community could achieve. That night, as they settled by their fireplace reviewing reform proposals, Martha considered their unlikely journey's beginning, a fugitive's arrival, a sheriff's dark secret, conspiracy unraveling across territorial expanse. Each choice made had led further from intended retreats into ever-expanding circles of responsibility. Sometimes I wonder if Morrison knew, she mused aloud, if his schemes pushed people to breaking points that would eventually destroy him. Tyrants often plant seeds of their own defeat, Jack philosophized. He counted on fear and isolation. Instead, he created the circumstance forcing us together. The observation carried truth beyond immediate biography. Western transformation needed catalysts, moments when individual survival intersected with collective justice. Their story might be remembered as a footnote to larger progress, or perhaps as warning about how close corruption came to permanent victory. But memory matters less than continuation. As winds howled outside their reinforced walls, Martha and Jack planned the next day's work, mentoring new reform advocates, refining governmental transparency, ensuring economic development served all residents fairly. The sheriff had come with a secret that threatened everything. The truth they unearthed had rebuilt it all better. Not perfect, Arizona would never achieve perfect, but demonstrably improved through courage, cooperation, and refusal to let darkness define frontiers. Future. Morning would bring new challenges, new settlers seeking guidance, new potential corruptions requiring vigilance. But as Martha settled to sleep in her cabin, once a fortress, now home, always a symbol, she embraced knowledge that evil's greatest weakness remained unchanged. Light eventually finds every shadow, and truth liberates all who pursue it fearlessly. The American West still wrote its future daily. But the authors had changed. Instead of robber barons and corrupt architects, communities shaped their own stories. And in that shift from exploitation to empowerment lay the greatest legacy of all, hope that justice, however hard fought, eventually prevails for those willing to defend it. The fugitive cowboy had carried that possibility to Martha's doorstep. Together, they'd proven redemption possible for both individuals and systems. The Arizona Territory's transformation would inspire generations, but its true measure lived in ordinary citizens empowered to resist extraordinary oppression. In the end, Martha's simple cabin had launched an unexpected revolution, one determined, voice joining desperate flight to create a chorus singing justice's eternal song. The sheriff's secret had threatened to silence that song forever. The truth revealed ensured it would echo across frontiers still unmapped, promising freedom to those brave enough to pursue it. And that promise, more than any empire's fall or reformer's victory, remained the greatest gift Morrison's exposure had bestowed upon the American West. Hope, hard won and harder kept, that truth ultimately prevails when good people refuse to surrender their light to darkness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.